Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm doing a hypothetical 2028 presidential election prediction. In this video, I don't believe this is a matchup I've done before. This is Marco Rubio versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now Marco Rubio is the current Secretary of State of the United States. He was also the former U.S. Senator from the state of Florida and has been seen as a rising Republican star for quite a pretty decent long time now, over the last 10 years or so. Rubio is someone that, even though he is serving as President Trump's Secretary of State, I think he is someone that has a unique ability to appeal to both the conservative wing of the Republican Party of the George W. Bush, the Mitt Romney wing, while also being Trump's Secretary of State. I think would be able to get a lot of the Trump voters on his side as well in a general election. He may not have the voter turnout levels of, say, President Trump in certain areas like in the Rust Belt maybe, but I do also think he would make up for it for doing better in the suburbs and being a much more, I would say, effective communicator in terms of how he conveys his message than even, say, President Trump or Vice President Vance may potentially be in this election matchup. So I do think Marco Rubio is honestly probably the strongest candidate the Republicans have for 2028. Now, on the Democratic side, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a very fascinating candidate in her own right. She is someone that has been getting a ton of momentum recently, especially among younger voters, and being that next Bernie Sanders heir apparent on the Democratic Party. Now, it's someone, or AOC is someone that I think you would say on paper is someone that probably would not win a general election and she would be considered too far left. But as we saw with Zohran Mamdani with New York City, and you're seeing even in special elections across the United States, when there's a big enough referendum and a big enough wave, a lot of these farther left Democratic candidates can still ultimately win, especially if their message is popular enough with younger voters and younger voters get out to vote. So it's a really interesting matchup between AOC and Marco Rubio. And doing just some preliminary research on this, I even was looking at some articles on Google, and it made a very interesting point of what Marco Rubio versus AOC, what this matchup would really be like. This is a very, very stark contrast in terms of policy and direction of the United States. AOC is one of the farthest left Democrats that may be running for president in 2028. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State for President Trump. It's really, you couldn't get more sort of differentiated in a matchup than you potentially could. Now, it's going to be interesting because this poll actually, there's a poll recently from Atlas Intel which shows Marco Rubio leading the Republican primary from May 4th to May 7th at 45.4%. In that same poll on the Democratic side, despite Kamala Harris being the leader in the averages, AOC actually leads at 26% in this poll, with Buttigieg and Newsom behind her in second and third place. So I want to take a look at AOC versus Marco Rubio. And of course, this is with the context of the current approval ratings of President Trump, who at this current point in time is down roughly about 20 points, or nearly 19 points, in his approval rating average. So certainly that gives the Democrats an added boost. Come 2028, we'll have to wait and see how the numbers obviously all shake out. But using all this information, we're going to look at what I think a 2028 map would look like between Rubio and AOC. Now, first things first, we have to take a look at the 2024 map and the 2020 map and the shifts that we've seen over the last few election cycles. So just, if you're not familiar, President Trump won in 2024, getting a very substantial amount of electoral votes. I believe he got 312 to Kamala Harris's 226. And a large reason being Trump was able to win several of the battleground states of Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Now, in 2020, in the election that Joe Biden won, Joe Biden was able to win all these toss-up states except for North Carolina. However, I do believe that Joe Biden, being more of an establishment Democratic candidate and the vice president of Barack Obama, was able to do very well with African-American turnout in places like in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And while I think AOC would do in this election good with a lot of working class voters on the younger side, I'm not sure if she would do as well with those working class voters on the older side and in the African American turnout area, which may give Marco Rubio a potential chance in some of these states. Also, I do just want to look on the past elections here. This is from 2020 to 2024, where pretty much everything in the country got more red. Not really too much of a surprise considering how the election ended up going for Donald Trump. But I first want to show you the 2012 to 2024 map for some potential trends to keep an eye out for. This was from the 2012 election to 2024, and you see some of these states that have trended towards the Democratic and Republican side. You see Nevada shifted 9.8% towards Donald Trump. You see Wisconsin move 8 points, Michigan 11 points, Pennsylvania 7. North Carolina shifted towards Trump only by about a 1.2% margin, but then a place like Georgia shifted 5.6%, Texas 2.1%, Arizona 3.5%. Even we can look at 2016, but there's a lot more third-party vote. Georgia still shifted 2.9% from 2016 to 2024 towards Kamala Harris. Alaska shifted a little bit as well. Nevada still has moved far to the right, though, and the Rust Belt has not moved too much since 2016, maybe slightly more to the right. So what does this all mean? Well, for 2028, I think we still have a pretty good idea of the states that would be considered safe for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and for Marco Rubio. I usually start going west to east. I'll start with the Democratic states first. All the states that are considered safe are states I think will go 15% or more for the margin of victory when everything is said and done. I think for AOC, she would win the states of Washington, Oregon, California by 15 points, Hawaii for sure. Colorado is going to be an interesting state because in 2024, I'll pull up the 2024 map, it voted for Kamala Harris by about 11 points, but in 2020 it did vote for Joe Biden by 13.5. So it's going to be right around that 15-point margin. I think given the current approval ratings of the Trump administration, I do think we're going to see some of the blue states get bluer, and I think Colorado will be one of those places that will continue to grow and get above 15 points. So I think Colorado will go safe. Despite falling under 15 points in 2024, I think we're going to see Illinois go back to being a safe Democratic state. The Washington, D.C. will be safe as it normally is. I think we're going to see the state of Maryland be safe over 15 points. The state of Delaware will be safe over 15 points. Though, again, I do think a little bit getting underestimated is Marco Rubio's ability of being an effective speaker and campaigner. I think he would do a better job in suburban areas than Donald Trump would, and I think that may give him a little bit of an added boost despite the fact Trump's approval ratings are very poor right now. That being said, I do think New York would still fall in safe Democratic, as well as most of New England and Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine's 1st Congressional District. So just on the 15% or over margin of victory, I think Democrats AOC would start out roughly around 177 electoral votes. As for the states that I think will remain for Marco Rubio in the 15 points or more, we're going to start with a lot of the usual states: Utah, Wyoming, Idaho. Montana's an interesting one. It voted for Trump by about 20 points in 2024, close to falling under in 2020, but I do think Montana would remain in the safe Republican category for Marco Rubio. North and South Dakota, I think, would be safe. Nebraska at large in its 3rd district, I do believe, would be safe. The state of Kansas, I do think, would be safe as well, despite being close in 2020 and 2024, going over 15 points again. I think we'll see that. Oklahoma, I think, will continue to be safe, as well with Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina. All are going to be considered safe seats, which is, again, over 15 points. So now the election really starts. AOC's at 177. Marco Rubio's at 121. Now, the remaining seats that I'm going to put in the likely category, sort of a wide range. Likely is anywhere from a 15-point margin of victory, or I guess 14.9% margin of victory, down to about a 5-point margin of victory. So certainly a very large swing. And here you're looking at the states that were reliably blue states and reliably red states, but just fell under that 15-point threshold, all the way down to even some of the battleground states like Arizona, or even like you could say Ohio or Iowa of the past that fell into that category. So in 2024, we can look at states like New Mexico, which voted for Kamala Harris by about 6 points over Donald Trump, and in an election environment that, even though Rubio, I think, would do a better job in suburban areas than Trump would, in an election environment that's going to be more Democratic friendly due to Trump's approval ratings, I think we'll see New Mexico's margin expand for AOC. Minnesota is a state, it was nearly just under 5 points in 2024. I think something similar there. New Hampshire, though I do think Rubio would do better in New Hampshire than Trump or Vance would in 2028. Again, another state where you're right around that 5-point margin. New Jersey, Virginia could all be in that category as well, just some examples. So I think we're going to see AOC for sure take New Mexico by more than 5 points. I think we'd see New Jersey and Virginia go at least 5 points for AOC. The state of Maine, I think for sure would also go 5 points in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's direction. Minnesota and New Hampshire are tricky because I think they're kind of right upon the precipice of going into a 15 or going into that 5-point margin of victory or not. I'm going to actually split here and put Minnesota as likely Democrat. I'm going to put New Hampshire. I'll put New Hampshire as likely for now. I'm kind of right around there. I'm like a 5-point victory. I'm going to put it in lean Democrat for now. So it's going to be the early one in New Hampshire. I'll put it as lean Democrat, but it's right around that margin. Nebraska's 2nd district with more population growth in the Omaha area, I think will also continue to trend to the Democratic side. At this current point, AOC gets up to 226 electoral votes. These are all the electoral votes, all the states that Kamala Harris carried in 2024. Not really too much of a surprise that AOC has carried all of those states. Now, for Marco Rubio, some of the places that I think are going to be likely Republican in between 15 and 5%, you're looking at places like the 1st district, which voted for Trump by 13 points. You're looking at states like Texas, which was right around a 13.5-point win. Florida was a 13-point win. Iowa, 13 points. Ohio was an 11-point win. Maine 2nd district was a 9-point win. I think we're going to see a lot of replication on this map, even as these places with Trump's approval rating are probably softening on Trump right now. I think in a presidential election environment, Rubio will still bring a lot of these states back into the fold. Maybe not by the same numbers as Trump in some of the more rural areas, but I think Rubio, at the very least, would do a good enough job and win these places by more than 5 points. So Texas would go likely. Florida, I think, would go likely. The state of Alaska, despite the Senate race being competitive in 2026, I think the presidential race in 2028 would still go likely for the Republicans. And for the state of Iowa and Ohio, the varying levels of competitiveness without Trump at the top of the ticket, we're going to have to wait and see. But I think for sure, Maine 2nd district goes likely are. I think we're going to see Iowa and Ohio at very least go for more than 5 points for Rubio. So now we have AOC at 226, Rubio's at 219, and now the remaining states are the remaining battleground states, which were talked about for most of 2024. These are the main 7 battleground states. If you want to include New Hampshire in this list, you can as well, but I think it's a little bit more Democratic trending than the rest of these states. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. So this is going to be an interesting election because the polls right now are definitely not on President Trump and the Republicans and Marco Rubio's side. Trump is down about 20 points. Of course, things can always change from now to 2028. We'll have to wait and see on that front. AOC, again, I think is a Democrat that certainly can get a lot of younger voters out to vote for her. But for the Democratic vote, or for the voters in 2024 that didn't vote for Kamala Harris because they were concerned maybe she was too far left, I don't think they're going to switch and vote for AOC in 2028, even though President Trump is doing bad. I think Marco Rubio may present sort of a softer approach of what a Donald Trump presidency might look like, and that might give Rubio a little bit of an opportunity in some of these states. Of this map, I think the swing state that I'm most confident would vote for Marco Rubio would actually be the state of North Carolina. Despite Roy Cooper doing very strongly in the Senate race in 2026, in the early polling, North Carolina at the presidential level, between Marco Rubio and AOC, I think Marco Rubio is the right type of Republican to carry the state of North Carolina by under 5 points, probably around 3 to 3.5% or so, and keeping it in the Republican category. It's voted Republican for Donald Trump in 2024, 2020, and 2016 by varying degrees here, but it has voted red consistently in the last 3 presidential elections. I think it stays the course on that one. Of this map, AOC, I think, is going to contend in a lot of these states and do very well in a lot of these states and get high percentages. I'm not sure Arizona is going to flip to the Democrats in 2028 after it voted for Trump by 5.5% in 2024. It was a very massive shift back to the Republicans, including Maricopa County, which voted for Trump by 3.5%. Marco Rubio, I think, is someone that, in a border state especially of Arizona, I'm not sure if a farther left Democrat like AOC is going to play too well in the state of Arizona, especially with Marco Rubio at the top of the ticket. I think Arizona overall goes in the lean Republican category, and that brings Rubio up to 246 electoral votes. Now things are going to get kind of interesting because you have Nevada and you have Georgia. Nevada's a state that voted for Donald Trump by 3.1% in 2024. After in 2020, it voted for Joe Biden by 2.4%. And a large reason being was Clark County, where Las Vegas is, voted for Biden by 9.4% in 2020. It voted for Harris by 2.6% in 2024. Can Marco Rubio, with President Trump's approval ratings currently in, basically in the gutter, can Rubio still attract enough of those voters in Clark County and keep Nevada trending in the Republican direction? it's going to be tough. It's going to be very close. A 3.4% shift back to the Democrats for 2020 is certainly very possible. Nevada can really go either way between Rubio and Cortez. I think Ocasio-Cortez is really, really close. I'm narrowly giving the edge to Marco Rubio by under 1 point. I think it honestly ends up being one of the closest swing states in the country. But I do think Nevada overall, after like 2 weeks of counting, because it's Nevada, I think we're going to see ultimately Rubio pull out the victory there. Now we have Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I'll tell you right now, you may disagree with it. I'm keeping all of these states under 1 point in the tilt margin because I really think in this election between AOC and Marco Rubio, it's really going to come down to the wire here. It may be honestly one of the closer popular vote to electoral college differences that we've seen in the modern political era in quite some while. AOC Marco Rubio is going to be very, very tight here, and I'm even going to break with history a little bit. Of the three Rust Belt states, we can look at 2024. Donald Trump won Wisconsin by 0.86%, Michigan by 1.4%, and Pennsylvania by 1.7%, all of which are very much in the reach of AOC and the Democrats in 2028. In 2020, Wisconsin voted for Biden by 0.63%, Michigan was 2.8%, Pennsylvania was 1.2%. Now, again, the shifts I showed you in these states have definitely gone more to the Republican side. The question is going to be, do they shift enough back to the Democrats for 2028 for them to go for AOC over Marco Rubio? If the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin was any indicator, Wisconsin's ready to vote for a Democrat in the next presidential election. Will it? Ultimately, I'm not too sure. I'm a little hesitant on it, but I do think at very least AOC would be able to pull out a very narrow victory in the state of Wisconsin by right around under 1 point. And I think a large reason being is going to be the Milwaukee area and the Madison area and the Milwaukee areas in the state of Wisconsin. I think it might be just enough for AOC to pull out the victory there. So Wisconsin, I actually am going to have going to the Democrats. The state of Michigan, which is next door, obviously, to Wisconsin, is where things get tricky. Because Michigan did vote 1.4% for Donald Trump in 2024, and even though it did vote for Joe Biden 2.8% in 2020, I don't know if there's enough of those Democratic voters, again, with the African-American turnout aspect that I mentioned earlier, I don't know if there's enough of those voters for AOC to win the state of Michigan against Rubio in 2028, but I think there's very much possible because it's going to be super, super close. Ultimately, I do narrowly give the state to Marco Rubio, but it's going to be extremely close in the state of Michigan. Pennsylvania, I think, is kind of a similar story to Michigan. It was the most Republican of the three battleground states in 2024, voting for Trump by 1.7%. It did vote for Joe Biden by 1.2% in 2020, but I don't think AOC is going to do as well in the working class areas, in the white areas, in the rural counties throughout Pennsylvania that Joe Biden was able to do in 2020, and I think Rubio would do just enough to pull up the victory and win the state of Pennsylvania, again, also by under 1 point. The final state that we have is the state of Georgia. Georgia's a really interesting state because it's definitely, of all these battleground states, the one that's trending to the Democrats the most on this map. It voted for Donald Trump by 2.2% in 2024. Joe Biden did win it by 0.24% in 2020. Two Democratic senators, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, possibly a Democratic governor after 2026. So Georgia, it's going to remain to be seen ultimately how it all goes. On this current map, I think, again, it's going to be very close. Like Wisconsin, I'm actually narrowly giving the edge to AOC in Georgia, though I don't think she's going to do as strongly with black turnout like Joe Biden did in 2020. I think, like with Wisconsin, it'll be just barely enough to give her a narrow victory on this map. So my prediction right now for AOC versus Marco Rubio gives Marco Rubio the very narrow edge of 286 electoral votes. AOC gets 252 electoral votes, a very, very close one. The popular vote probably would be like AOC by like a point on the national vote across the country. It'd be very, very close here, but I think AOC would slightly get the popular vote, but what a close election I think this will ultimately end up being. Obviously, we're in May of 2026, so if you disagree, please leave your thoughts down below. Who do you think is going to win between Rubio and AOC if this was a 2028 matchup? For now, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment down below of a 2028 matchup you would like to see me do, or a video topic you have you want to see me address. Do all that fun stuff down below. For now, thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video.